is a 2020 BMW X5M Competition. And it's an SUV, a really, really fast SUV. This has 617 horsepower. Think about that for a second. This is a mid-size SUV with more power than a Lamborghini Huracan and a sticker price of over $120,000. And today, I'm going to review it. Before I get started, a quick reminder to check out Cars and Bids, which is my new online car auction website for modern enthusiast cars. If you have a cool car to sell from the 1980s and up, sell it with Cars and Bids, the ultimate place to sell your cool cars from the modern era. And if you're looking to buy a cool modern enthusiast car, you will find the best variety and daily auctions on Cars and Bids. Go to carsandbids.com. I've borrowed this X5M Competition from Crevier BMW here in Orange County in Southern California. Crevier BMW is the largest BMW dealership in North America. They sell more BMWs than anyone, and they have all the new BMW models from the new 2 Series Grand Coupe up to the X7, and that includes the new X5M Competition. So let's talk about this thing. The original high-performance X5 came out for the 2002 model year, and it had 320 horsepower. My, how times have changed. The X5M came out for 2010 with 555 horsepower, then the next one had 567, and now the newly redesigned X5M has 600 horsepower, but that's the base model X5M with a starting price of around $106,000. This is better than that. This is the X5M Competition with 617 horsepower, 0 to 60 in 3.8 seconds, and a starting price of around $115,000 in a BMW X5. This is the same car you see parked outside of every Starbucks and yoga studio in North America. Primary competitors include the Mercedes-AMG GLE 63, the Porsche Cayenne Turbo, and the Jeep Grand Cherokee Trackhawk in the quest for the title of Most Insane High-Performance SUV. And this is pretty insane. So today, I'm going to review the X5M Competition. I'm going to start by taking you on a tour and showing you all of the quirks and features of one of today's most powerful family SUVs. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'll give it a DOUGSCORE. All right, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the X5M Competition. The first thing you notice when you climb in here, that would be the color of this interior. Bright red seats, lower dashboard, a lot of red in here. Actually, it has a bit of an orange tint to it, and in fact, BMW calls it Saphir Orange, but it looks really cool. Not what you'd expect to see in a BMW X5, exactly what you'd expect to see in an M car. Very neat. The other thing you notice when you climb in here, especially at night or in a parking garage, is the lighting, which is really cool in this interior. Just look around, you can see little strips of accent lighting basically everywhere on the door panel, the dashboard, and it all adds so much to the mood and the character of this interior. You even have this little strip next to the center console, a small area, but again, it helps enhance the experience. Good attention to detail, and another great example of that is in the seats. You can see the X5M logo lights up in the seats when you're in a dark area. That's so cool. So many cars just have an embroidered piece that says the model name in the seats. Not here, it's lit. That's just awesome. Also, another cool lighting touch in here is in the speakers. When you have the stereo on, the speakers are lit up on the inside. You can see on the door it looks pretty cool, but the one by the mirror has like a cyclone design of lighting inside it. Again, contributes to a cooler atmosphere in here. It's amazing what they've been able to do with lighting in this interior. Just changes the whole feel of the inside of this car, makes it seem more alluring and exciting. Next up, let's go back to the center console for a second. I want to talk about this X5 X5M badge in the middle. This looks askew, like it isn't straight. It wasn't lined up properly. But of course it was. I think it looks like that because the center control stack above it is tilted, and so it being straight looks weird with the tilt right above it. But either way, I like this badge here, and it reminds you how special your car is, but it's funny how off it looks. Anyway, open up the lid where this badge is sitting. You can see the cup holders, and not just any cup holders in here. They are heated and cooled. This is part of the executive package for this car. Heated and cooled cup holders to keep your drink warm or hot while you're driving along. Nice idea. And next up, another cool quirk in this area, there are 3 screens in this interior. You have your gauge cluster screen, most cars have that. You have your center infotainment screen, pretty much all cars have that. But you also have your climate screen, which is hidden. Take a look right now, you don't see another screen here, but you turn on the climate control and this small screen turns on and it tells you your current climate control temperature and your current fan speed. It's a nice display, looks good, obviously very informative and helpful, but the coolest part to me is the fact that when you turn off the climate control, it disappears. You wouldn't even know it's there, so it doesn't really clutter the interior unless you're actually using it, and it can be helpful. That's a cool touch. So many cars have a giant climate screen, and when you turn it off, it just sits there. Not so in the X5. And by the way, speaking of climate controls in here, the heated and cooled seat controls are kind of annoying. You have a button in the center control stack, you press that, and it turns on your heated and cooled seat menu in the center screen, and then you decide whether you want heated or cooled. This adds a step to what should be a pretty simple process. Push a button, your cooled seat goes on. Push a different button, your heated seat goes on. Here, you actually have to go into the screen. It's integrated pretty well, but it would be better to just have 2 separate buttons, one for heated, one for cooled. Unfortunately, they didn't do that here. And by the way, speaking of controls, in this vicinity, you can use gestures to make controls as well. You don't have to just press buttons and use the screen. For instance, if you move your finger in a circle like this, it turns up the stereo volume. You can see I move my finger, the volume goes up. Same deal the other direction, move my finger and the volume goes down. This is BMW's gesture control feature, and there are actually quite a few gestures available to control items in this car, so you don't have to go into menus or buttons for every little thing. Of course, you have to remember them, and the car has to read your gestures, and it's not always perfect, but it's better than you might think, and this can be kind of useful once you learn the gestures. And next up, the area around the gear lever. Quite a few buttons in this area, some worth mentioning. One, the little button with the camera on it obviously activates the camera system, and this car has a pretty incredible one. For one thing, there's a car wash mode. You activate that and it shows you the front of the car top down, so you can like line it up with one of those tracks at an automated car wash, hence car wash mode. But definitely the coolest camera feature in this car is the 3D surround camera system, which is just unbelievable. You can see around the car from the outside like there's a little drone flying around you taking an image. I have mentioned this feature now in probably 4 or 5 BMWs I've reviewed. I am still blown away by it. Other automakers have started to adopt it, but no one does it quite as well as BMW, and this car is a great demonstration. It's really amazing to see this feature, and if you bump this car into something with that camera system, then you probably shouldn't be driving. And next up, another button in this center console is the exhaust button. You can see it there. Push it, and it activates this car's sport exhaust, which of course sounds pretty good. Take a listen. And next up, the last cool button in the center console is marked M mode. You press that and the car goes into M mode. You can see the gauge cluster changes and gives you a more focused display, and basically all of the configurable settings go into sport. The steering, the suspension, the braking, everything. The coolest part here though is if you hold down the M mode button, it puts the car into track mode. You have to first confirm on the infotainment screen you want to go into track mode, and when you do, that screen turns off off. It figures you don't need any distractions when you're on the racetrack. All of the driving aids also turn off, and then it's just you and your X5M, so you can do some hot laps in your family SUV. And next up, let's talk infotainment system. I've mentioned this system in a few other BMW reviews, but I'll hit some highlights. One is it's really good. It's very responsive. It has a large screen angled towards the driver, everything very easy to see and understand, and you have 2 points of control. You can use your finger like I'm doing now, or you can use this big dial in the center to go through all of your menus, but you have the option whether you prefer your touchscreen or your dial. Either way, great infotainment system like you would expect for a modern luxury car at this price point. Now, in this infotainment system, there are some rather unusual quirks. Undoubtedly, the quirkiest quirk is something called the experience modes. Check this out. You click on experience modes and you're given 3 options: executive, well-being, or expressive. Now, each of these experience modes will adjust basically all of the interior systems to provide the experience it says it offers: an executive experience, or an expressive one, or a well-being experience. You're wondering what exactly I'm talking about. Well, you go into well-being and the car starts to adjust everything. First, it changes the ambient lighting to sort of a warm orange. It also adjusts the air temperature coming out of the vents. It turns on the seat massagers, and it will even turn on like comfort well-being style music. And as you can see, it describes the well-being experience as allowing you to immerse yourself in a relaxing atmosphere and enjoy some downtime. Now, this may seem ridiculous, but actually these experience modes are a pretty good idea. There are so many configurable comfort items in here that if you wanted to put yourself in your own well-being mode, you would have to manually turn on the seat climate control, the regular climate control, the massagers, the temperature, the ambient lighting, blah, blah, blah. But if you go into the experience mode, one push and it does all of that for you, depending on what experience you want. That's a pretty good idea. And I suspect more and more cars will be going to this sort of feature, one-touch experience modes. When you think about it, we're already doing it with drive modes. You can turn on a custom drive mode, perfectly tailoring your steering, your acceleration, your handling experience. Why not the interior comfort experience as well? I suspect more and more vehicles will start adding these experience modes. And on that topic, another thing you can do in the infotainment system is configure M1 and M2. These are your programmable drive modes, and you can activate them with the push of these red thumb buttons on the steering wheel, and it's a really cool idea. You can configure, for instance, a canyon road driving mode. You make that M1, and then the moment you find yourself on a canyon road, press M1, and that's the mode you're in. Or configure a commuter driving mode. Make that M2, and then when you're commuting, you press that thumb button, and instantly you're in that drive mode. And that way you don't have to go through and adjust each different individual driving setting. You can just have your desired modes at the push of a thumb button on the wheel. I love that. Great feature. Finally, one other interesting item worth noting in the infotainment system is the ability to heat the armrests. That's right, not just the seats. You can configure it so the center armrest is heated when you turn on the heated seats. That is a nice luxury feature for a nice luxury car. And next up, I want to move on to the last screen in this interior, the gauge cluster screen, which is really cool. I love how it looks when you're accelerating, building power, or revving the engine. You can see the tachometer has this cool display to show your revs, and I think that looks really neat. It's even better when you're in M mode. You can see the tachometer is now shown on both sides of the speedometer display in the center, which really does enhance your sporty feel. You feel like you're doing something really performance-y. With that said, I wish that the gauge cluster was a little bit more configurable, frankly. It's one giant screen, so you could have it do all sorts of things, but it just doesn't. Mercedes-Benz allows a lot more customizability and configurability in this gauge cluster screen. You can minimize stuff, maximize it, move things where you want. BMW doesn't really offer that, and it's certainly behind both Mercedes and Audi in that respect. And next up, a few more quirks of this interior. One is the climate vent over on the driver's side. You can see this one's kind kind of strange. Not your typical rectangle. There's like a second half of it above the lower half. Not a climate vent design you'll see in too many cars. It's actually repeated over on the passenger side. Again, you have sort of a lower climate vent and an upper one, I guess, to really maximize the air in this interior. And next up, another interesting control. Over on the door panel, you can see there's a seat with the number 2 printed there. If you press that, then your driver's seat controls will now control the passenger seat. I guess it's telling the seat you want to control seat number 2. The intent of this control is you have someone sitting in the back who wants more space, but there's no one in the front passenger seat. You can easily just move the front passenger seat forward without having to reach over. But you can also use this feature to really screw with the person sitting in the passenger seat and say, your seat's moving, I don't know what's going on, maybe it's possessed. Of course, that's exactly how I would use it. Now, another interesting control on the door panel, you can see the switch to open up the tailgate in back. It's mounted there, right next to your switch to roll down the power windows, and it's the same design switch. And if you push it down like the power window switch, that opens up the rear tailgate. I can't believe that's the place they chose to put that. I could easily see going to roll down the window and accidentally opening the tailgate. Definitely not my first choice of placement for that. Hopefully there's some lockout that makes certain you can't open the tailgate while you're driving. I will say though, with this switch, I do like the fact that if you pull it the other direction, you can close the tailgate from sitting in the driver's seat. A lot of times you're able to open it but not close it. Having the close functionality is really convenient in case a kid is getting stuff out, accidentally leaves it open. You don't have to go back there and press the button to close it. You can do it from right here. And next up, we move on to the back of the X5M. And as you can see, rear seat room is reasonably good back here. Not huge, but the X5 has never been a massive SUV. Still good enough for an adult to sit in front and an adult to sit in back, and they're both acceptably comfortable. Of course, you also have a lot of headroom back here, far more than you would have if this was an X6M competition. Other rear seat items, you have your own rear seat climate controls back here, although the screen to control them is not as luxurious as that one up front. Instead, you get this old school clock font display. Still, you have controls back here so rear passengers can set their own temperature. You also have heated rear seats. Press this button and the heated seats turn on back here. A nice luxury feature like you'd expect for this car. Lastly, one feature I like back here I forgot to mention up front. If you have the car running and you open up the door, then that little blue accent light on the door panel becomes a red blinking light to let oncoming traffic know that the door is open, be careful, which is a cool use of that light strip. It's ambient lighting when the door is closed. When the door is open, it's a safety feature, and it's neat to kind of see that dual purpose in the light blink every time you open the door. And next up, we move around to the back of the X5M, and I have to say I love the way the tailgate opens in this car because it's split. You have the upper tailgate, which you can see, and then you have the lower tailgate, which opens separately. I love this feature, and owners of this car do too, for a lot of reasons. For one thing, the upper tailgate is now smaller, which makes it easier to open in lower spaces. You also have the ability to sit back here if you want to enjoy a nice picnic out of your X5, or you can lift stuff on here a little bit easier than having to get it over the bumper and into the cargo area. It's a great feature, and it's been a hallmark of the X5 ever since it first came out more than 20 years ago. The reason for that is the original X5 was co-developed with the Range Rover. BMW owned Land Rover and Range Rover at the time, and the Range Rover had always had a split tailgate for those reasons. You could sit on it, you could picnic out the back of it, you could use it to put your hunting equipment on when you took your Range Rover into the field, and so the X5 adopted it as well and continues to use it to this day, which I absolutely love. Now, obviously, a split tailgate adds complication to the production process, especially when you have things power operated, because you close it and you can see they come together and close automatically. But I'm thrilled that BMW still does it. I think it's a great feature, and I wish other automakers did it too. As for the cargo area itself, nothing particularly interesting or crazy back here. It is pretty big for a mid-size crossover. One thing worth noting, you can drop the rear seats from the cargo area by pulling this tab. The seats go down, but unlike in some rivals, you cannot put them back up from the cargo area. There's no button to press to get them back in place. You'd have to go around and manually do that. That's a little bit of a disappointment considering the price point of this vehicle. And next up, since I'm on the outside of this X5, let's talk lighting. Nothing unusual with the rear lights in this car, but up front you do have BMW's laser lights, which is the latest advancement in lighting technology, the best, most focused field of view, and I can only imagine what those will cost to replace in an accident. Otherwise, on the outside of this car, I want to talk styling. I love how the latest X5 looks. I think BMW has generally gone back to more cleaner, simpler designs for their cars. The newest 5 Series is a good example, and this is another one. I love it. Clean look, well proportioned, very attractive car. Not daring, not exciting. Nobody's going to turn their head and point at it, but to me, that's kind of the point of a car like the X5M. It's a high performance family SUV, but it's also kind of under the radar. And I think this car is sort of subdued, not too aggressive, not too bold styling, definitely helps it. I think this is a really good looking generation of the X5, probably the best one since the original. And speaking of styling, one big benefit of the latest X5 to me is up front with the grille. It's large for a BMW, but not dramatically oversized like in some other BMW models. It still looks pretty reasonable and rational, and again sort of contributes to the subdued overall look of this car. But since I'm up front, we also must go under the hood, and you have the giant twin-turbo V8. Base model of this car puts out 600 horsepower. This one, the Competition, makes 617 horsepower in like a family mid-size SUV. Massive engine, 0 to 60 in 3.8 seconds. And as you can see, on top of everything, you have a plastic cover with fake carbon fiber that says BMW M Power, and probably costs about $3 to make. Now, one last item worth noting, the competition package for this car gets you more than just the 17 additional horsepower compared to the regular X5M. It costs $9,000 extra, and you also get larger wheels that are distinctive to the X5M competition. You get different exterior trim, obviously badging, but just the general look is a little bit different. You get the sport exhaust, which you heard earlier, obviously sounds very good. Definitely a little bit more exhaust note than the regular X5M, and the competition package also gets you M Sport seat belts. So you get a lot of important stuff, exterior, cosmetic, performance, and then different seat belts as well, all part of the competition package. And so those are the quirks and features of the BMW X5M Competition. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the X5M Competition. I have always really liked the X5M from when it very first came out. I love how it's, unlike some of the other M cars, I love how it's still been able to remain an X5 that has some subtle upgrades on the outside you wouldn't necessarily know until you know. One thing you notice when you sit in here, very quiet. BMW's just done a great job of eliminating road noise from the cars around you. Out of in sport mode, and instantly you can tell, unbelievably responsive, just incredibly so. It's also just the moment you start to tap the throttle, the response is just excellent. And to me, that's almost more important than the car being fast, that instant throttle response, because that's what makes it feel fast, and this certainly has that. And not every turbo car does. And in the days of dropping big naturally aspirated engines for turbo engines, you lose that sometimes, well, not here in this car. Wow. It is fast, very fast, really an impressive car. From a purely performance standpoint, this is quite amazing. It also provides you with more of a performance feel than a Cayenne Turbo does. Because it's an M car, it's sort of like the top of the range, the most aggressive, most exciting version. Cayenne Turbo just sort of feels like another Cayenne. Even the Turbo S, it's more muted than this. To me, this feels like just more aggressive, looks more aggressive, just a crazier looking car. With that said, I think one of the failings of this car, one of the, not failings, but drawbacks, one of the things BMW has to contend with is it's still an X5. So even though it's a $120,000 top of the range, ultra fast X5, people look at this and say, well, wait a minute, I could get a Cayenne and it's a Porsche. And the Cayenne in general just has a better brand image than an X5. X5 is a mom car, you know, you take it around your kids. yeah, this is the coolest one that'll ever exist, but it still has that feeling like it's tied to this like mid-sized luxury SUV, whereas Cayenne just feels better. And that's one of the difficulties, I think, of making a vehicle like this. You're selling an X5 at $120,000+. It can be a bit of a tough sell. It blows me away whenever I get into one of these, and the X3M is the same way, just how quick the steering is. The handling and steering is so unbelievably fast. It changes directions in a millisecond, and for an SUV, it's just incredible to me. Overall, I think this car is such a great package, and I always have, and they're amazing to buy used if you can get one with a warranty. They're such a great package. It's a great sized vehicle. It looks good now. The technology is fantastic. This is amazing. It drives unbelievably well. It's fast, it handles well. You can't beat this. As an all-around car, this is surely one of the very best vehicles on the market. And I love it. And I know it's really expensive, but when you really look at everything it's capable of, you can see how one could justify its expense. And so that's the BMW X5M Competition. This isn't as cool as a Porsche Cayenne Turbo S or a Lamborghini Urus, but it's a lot cheaper. And it's not as fast as a Jeep Trackhawk, but it's a lot nicer. Truthfully, this is a fantastic vehicle should you find yourself in need of a family SUV that can win a drag race against a Carrera GT. And now it's time to give the X5M Competition a DOUGSCORE. Starting with the weekend categories and styling, I think the new X5 is gorgeous, and the M version is even better, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Acceleration 0 to 60 is in 3.8 seconds, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Handling is very sharp, very good for an SUV, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Fun factor is excellent. This is loud and fast and quick to change directions, and it's one of the more enjoyable performance SUVs. Much more pure fun than the Cayenne, which seems relatively restrained by comparison, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Cool factor is okay, even though this is the M version, it's still just a BMW X5, and it gets a 5 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 33 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories and features. The X5M has a lot of great tech, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Comfort is a bit harsher than rivals thanks to a slightly rougher ride, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Quality is excellent, not perfect, but quite good, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Practicality is normal for a car like this, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Finally, value, and this is a great SUV, but it's a really expensive one. Huge money for a BMW X5, no matter how fast and exciting it is, and it gets a 6 out of 10 for a total daily score of 35 out of 50. Added up, and the DOUGSCORE is 68 out of 100, which places the X5M here against rivals. It gets a higher weekend score than the Audi RS Q8 and the Porsche Cayenne Turbo. It's simply more fun than those cars, but it also has a slightly rougher ride and slightly lower quality materials inside. Ultimately, though, this is a great performance luxury SUV, especially if you want your SUV to emphasize performance a bit more than it emphasizes luxury.